good morning, everybody. We'd love to begin with a simple call to worship, and it's something that Becky will sing a line, and then in response, we will respond. 5 notes, very simple. Becky will sing, for example, the first line.
We come as those open.
And then we'll respond with, open to God's Spirit. So would you stand? Let's practice that real quick. Can we do that line again? We come as those open.
We come as those open.
And then together we sing, open to God's Spirit. That's our part. So let's begin by taking 2 deep breaths together in God's presence, in the presence of each other. To become aware again that God is here as God is everywhere. That is, it is in God we live, move, and breathe.
We come as those open.
Open to God's Spirit.
We come as those broken.
Aching for love's healing.
We come as those seeking.
Ready to be found again.
We come as those listening.
Present to Christ's presence.
We come as those longing.
May your kingdom come.
I want Jesus to walk with me. I want Jesus to walk with me all along my journey. I want Jesus to walk with me. Can we sing that together? I want Jesus to walk with me. I want Jesus to walk with me all along my journey. I want Jesus to walk with me. We sing in my trials, Lord, walk with me. In my trials, Lord, walk with me. When my strength is failing, I want Jesus to walk with me. In my sorrows, Lord, walk with me. In my sorrows, troubles. In my troubles, Lord, walk with me. Yes. In my troubles, Lord, walk with me. When my life seems a burden, I want Jesus to walk with me. Well, friends, let's sing that first verse together as a prayer. I want Jesus to walk with me. Yes, I want Jesus to walk with me. All along my journey, I want Jesus to walk with me.
Amen. Close to the brokenhearted. It is in God we live, move, and have our being. As close as the air we breathe. Well, friends, the earth is filled with the weighty significance of God. Can we say that together? The earth is filled with the weighty significance of God. A poetic reading of Psalm 8. All of creation beckons me to worship you. The grandeur of the universe echoes your glory. More than spectacular is the work of your hands. The earth is filled with the weighty significance of God. Who can match your brilliance and authority? You set boundaries for the ocean. You raise majestic mountains to touch the sky. Sunrise and sunset happens on your watch. The earth is filled with the weighty significance of God. And who is humankind that you are mindful of us? The frail sons and daughters, that you would entrust us rule over all you've made. Who are the peoples of the earth that we get to bear your image?
The earth is filled with the weighty significance of God.
Who am I that you even notice me? How can it be that my tears and dreams matter to you? Eternal God, beyond time and space, who am I that you lean in when I draw near? The earth is filled with the weighty significance of God. Wind and sea obey at your command, yet you invite me to follow you with a whisper. Holy God, you know my hidden sin, yet you offer new mercies every morning. And finally, the earth is filled with the weighty significance of God.
God of creation, there at the start before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of life. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I can see your heart in every everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. Yes, so will I. Oh God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. Oh, and as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature, so will I. Oh, I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky, a canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you, so will I. Yes, so will I. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. Will you sing it to him today? If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. If the oceans roar on greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, then so will I. If the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls short, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. Oh God of salvation, you chased out my heart through all of my failure and pride. And on a hill you created the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so never could amount to your desire. You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
And we pray this together. We pray it humbly. We pray it with open and expectant hearts. And we pray it in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, in the name of the Holy Spirit. And everyone agreed and said, Amen. 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 Can I have a seat?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Faith. I oversee our educational programs here at BioLogos, and I have loved getting to talk with so many of you over this last day or two. And I've noticed a common theme, which happens at BioLogos events, that so many of us have a common story. Some growing up in a Christian context with a love of science, but finding, whether in college or earlier or later, that we're asked to choose between these two things, between faith and science. And this is a hard position, maybe a faith crisis, maybe deconstruction happens, but along the way we find BioLogos, and BioLogos has been a resource for so many to bring their faith and science back together as adults. And that is such a great story that we hear and love to hear. But one of the things that I get most excited about working at BioLogos is thinking about the kids, the youth that are growing up right now, that we have an opportunity to help them develop a positive relationship between science and faith from the beginning, that they don't have to feel this artificial choice and then recover from. But what if our kids could grow up knowing that science is an incredible window into God's love and knowing him deeper. And that's why I love working at BioLogos, particularly with our Integrate program. Integrate is a faith and science curriculum that has been designed for Christian school teachers, for home educators, and even for parents and grandparents who want their kids to see the harmony between faith and science as they grow up, and to explore that together with them. So if you are interested, if you work in education, if you've got kids or grandkids, or just are interested in learning more about the Integrate curriculum, we've got a table downstairs in the expo area. We would love to tell you a little bit more about this curriculum and the resources that come along with it. Another new resource that just came out in the last month or so that we're really excited about is a partnership with Fuller Equip. Fuller Equip is the online courses component of Fuller Seminary. They're doing some really great stuff, and we work together to take Unit 1 of our Integrate curriculum, which is kind of a intro to faith and science, and adapt it into an online course. Think of this as kind of a remix of a high school curriculum that's been adapted for an adult audience who wants to just get sort of the lay of the land of how faith and science can work together well. So this online course is free on Fuller Equip's website called Where to Start Faith and Science. So I encourage you to check that out, share that with someone in your life who might be interested in learning more about the relationship between faith and science, and keep your eyes open for more online courses in collaboration with Fuller Equip. Thank you so much.
God has placed us in a wondrous world. From the depths of the oceans to the canopies of the rainforests, from blooming gardens to majestic glaciers, we are surrounded by the beauty and majesty of all God has made. What's more, we understand God has called us to care for creation. But if we're honest, we also understand we have, in large part, failed to actually answer this call. We must confront the small and big ways we've neglected creation, admit we've disregarded it, and be honest about the harmful results of our actions to the planet and the people who live there. And then we must answer the call, understanding our concern for creation as a renewed expression of our faith. We care for creation because of our love for others. We recognize that our actions have a direct impact on others in the world. Our contributions to the global climate crisis, for example, may speed the advent of food shortages around the globe, and in so doing, place us in conflict with Jesus' admonition to feed others in his name. What's more, we care for creation because of our love for God. Put simply, God made the earth and left it in our care. Why confess we love God and then disregard what God has made? Instead, let our love be seen by the way we care for all God has called good. And ultimately, we care for creation, encouraged by our hope for the future. Though the outlook is grim, we still believe Jesus is making all things new. And so we have hope that our efforts on behalf of creation are not in vain. Imagine what will happen when the church commits itself to being part of the solution. Imagine what it will look like when we work together to use less, to reuse more, to travel, work, and live in ways that are more conscious of the footprints we leave. Affecting real change will not be easy, but that does not mean we should not try. God has truly placed us in a wondrous world. May we now live in gratitude for it and to preserve and protect it for all God's children.
Well, this morning we get to explore our connections with the beautiful world that God has made. After the presentations from the speakers, we will again have a time of discussion around your tables that you can talk together before we then have a Q&A time with both of our morning speakers that will be moderated. But first I want to introduce the host and moderator for this morning's session, Dr. April Cordero. April is a professor of biology and an administrator at Point Loma Nazarene University. In addition to her expertise in biology, she's trained in science education research, making her a gifted communicator on challenging scientific topics to students and Christian audiences. She serves on the BioLogos Board of Directors, is one of the authors of the BioLogos Integrate curriculum that we just heard about, and has received multiple awards for her own teaching. Welcome, April.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to those that are online. So glad to see you all at 8 something or other this morning, bright and early. And I want to thank Aaron and Becky and the worship team. What a beautiful introduction to a morning that's going to be about creation care. I don't know about you, but that was great, a Lauren Daigle song. We are here this third day. We're talking about faith and science and human flourishing. And I just want to give a quick recapture of where we've been, especially if somebody had to miss one of the two previous days. Wednesday evening, Francis shared about truth, science, faith, and trust, and he challenged us with a pledge to consider. Thursday morning, Deb inspired us with spectacular images of our universe, and she shared how our scientific knowledge of the universe isn't something to threaten our faith, but rather it expands our view of God. Jim followed up by speaking about time and evolution and how his understanding of both brought him into a deeper relationship with God. Charmaine, she shared a new framework for human flourishing, which she defined as the ability to live a good and fulfilling life. That was followed by Julia, who spoke about grace and how grace was shown to her and how she might show others, and we might show others, by being fully present and listening. There were 3 breakout sessions. I went to one, of course, on creation care, but I heard all 3 were excellent. And then finally, John closed the day yesterday by teaching us the importance of using the Bible as a tethering post instead of a springboard. And he challenged me personally when he posted this quick little question. Is there a biblical view of creation care? I'm like, ugh. Got me there, John. This morning, we open with 2 speakers who are going to talk about God's beautiful creation. And this topic is near and dear to my heart because our ecosystem and the creatures who live here with us on Earth are so amazing, and they just bring me so much joy. My students will tell you that when I'm out on the intertidal zone in San Diego on the coastline, and I'm sharing with them about the creatures there, I cannot contain my enthusiasm. I get super excited. I fall down sometimes showing something in the middle of the water. Yeah, I really do love God's creation and the really neat plants, animals, fungi, you name it. And I was thinking about how to introduce this session on creation care and that focuses on this beauty. And I knew I wanted to avoid the environmental doom and gloom story because we get plenty of that in our life. So to inspire myself, I went to the BioLogos website and I started looking at stuff, and a very, very recent article just this week came out. It's called Caring for Creation All Year Long. And I'm reading through it, and the post included this quote. And as soon as I read the quote, I said, oh, I need to share that this morning before I introduce the speakers. This quote is from BioLogos' very own Colin Hugerwerf. And I was told if I said that really fast, it would come out right. How'd I do, Colin? He is the podcast producer for Language of God. Here's what he said. There is a great darkness around us. It is one I have tried and tried to ignore out of fear that it might consume me. But I believe that the darkness will not overcome. And because I believe that the darkness will not overcome, I step into it. And there I find a community of living things that is beautiful, even in its brokenness, loved by God and deserving of my own love. And so I work, and so I lament, and so I hope. Thank you for that, Colin. Today we have the privilege of hearing from two wonderful speakers, both Rick Lindroth and Camille Dungy. And they are both passionate about nature like I am and the importance of caring for it and just living in it. Rick is going to speak first, followed by Camille. There'll be a short time for discussion, and then we'll do Q&A, and I'll use the little app and try to present your questions. So let's start with Dr. Rick Lindroth. We've known each other for a few years now, and we share a love for all things ecology and the environment. Rick loves road cycling, fly fishing, and hiking. Rick is Avila's Distinguished Achievement Professor of Ecology Emeritus and former Associate Dean for Research at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, now retired from there. His research focused on evolutionary ecology and global change ecology in forest ecosystems. He has been a Fulbright Fellow and is an elected Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Ecological Society for America, the Entomological Society of America, and the American Scientific Affiliation. Funded by grants from the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and other agencies, Rick and his group have published 250 journal articles and book chapters. He's currently working as a Distinguished Research Fellow with the Lumen Center, a community of scholars working at the intersection of Christianity and culture. He speaks to public and faith-based groups about creation care, climate change, biodiversity, and science denialism. Rick serves on a board of directors for Rocha USA, on an advisory board for Science for the Church, and is a member of the BioLogos Voices speaker. He and his wife have 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren, and he's got an article on the BioLogos website that I wanted to take a quote from. It's a bit provocative. He writes, "A proper understanding of the 2 books of Revelation, nature and scripture, would suggest that Christians should be among the most appalled, the most grieved, the most concerned, the most intentionally proactive of all people with respect to environmental degradation. Why are we not?" Today, Rick is going to speak about, I cannot read the slide on the screen in front of me, so I cannot tell you the title of Rick's talk. There it is. Every breath from starlight, awe, wonder, and re-enchantment with the living world. Please help me welcome Rick to the stage.
Thank you, April, for that very kind introduction. And what I'm seeing here, I'm not seeing. There we go. All right. Thanks to all of you for being here, both in person and online. And I just want to give a shout out to the BioLogo staff. They've been working tirelessly for months to put this together. So thank you. Thank you. And I also want to say I'm so thankful that I decided not to give a biblical basis for creation care. Oh my gosh. Dodged a bullet, so. All right, well, let's get started. And let's start with where it all began. I grew up as a free-range kid in rural northern Illinois. That little red star indicates where my house was. There was just a scattering of houses there at the time. And my backyard was thousands of acres of fields, forests, swamps, and other natural areas that I was able to roam in freely. Eventually, it became the home of the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory. One spring day, I came home super excited to tell my mother about all the double-decker frogs I had discovered in the pond nearby. If you know what double-decker frogs are, you'd be laughing. For some reason, my mom didn't want me running around the neighborhood telling everybody about this fantastic find, especially the construction workers who were building the house next door. And yet, years later, she never failed to mention it at the most inopportune times, like at my wedding reception. The ages of 7 to 12 are especially important in establishing deep connection to the natural world. And that was the age period during which nature was imprinted on my soul. I knew by the age of 7 that I wanted to become a biologist, and that's eventually what I became, training to become an ecologist. The summer of 1988 was pivotal in my scientific career. In the span of only 3 weeks, I started my faculty position at the University of Wisconsin. James Hansen, the eminent NASA scientist, testified to Congress that the age of human-caused climate change had arrived. Yellowstone National Park ignited, and by the time the fire was over, 1/3 of the park had been reduced to ash and cinder. These 3 seemingly disparate events coalesced to shape the rest of my career. I decided then to shift my research emphasis to ecological consequences of global environmental change. And over the next 35 years, we did research in the Great Lakes region, in the Intermountain West, in Canada, New Zealand, and Europe. We burned through millions of dollars of research funding and published hundreds of research papers. I was working under the assumption that if we learned about the damage that humans were causing to ecosystems, we'd actually want to do something about it. And here's the point, and actually, it's a confession. I was profoundly naive. Despite all of that effort, despite all of the efforts of tens of thousands of scientists around the world, we've hardly moved the needle on creation care. Our understanding of human impacts on Earth has far, far exceeded our interest in actually doing anything about them. By hundreds, thousands of different measures, such as global temperature change, shown here, the health of the Earth is worse now than when I started my career 35 years ago. Now, usually when I give lectures like this, I launch into a long litany of environmental disasters. The good news is, today I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to mention this one thing about planetary boundaries. Planetary boundaries are a framework that is helpful to think of in terms of human impacts on the Earth's environment. This framework has identified 9 different boundaries that define a safe operating limit, a safe operating space for human survival. And these boundaries are things such as climate and species diversity and pollution. In the most recent assessment, scientists determined that we have already exceeded 6 of those 9 boundaries. We are making the planet inhospitable for future life. Well, how did we get here? Let me just give a few comments as context for the rest of the presentation. One major reason is dualism, the philosophical separation of the mental or the sacred from the physical or the secular. That philosophy has fully integrated into our Western worldviews, beginning with Greek Platonism, accelerating with the Enlightenment disenchantment, and especially with the rise of secularism. Another reason is bad theology. We've incorporated dualism, this division of the sacred and the secular, into our religious beliefs, leading to the desacralization of the world and escapist eschatology. We've reduced the gospel to simply the salvation of individual human souls. And we've emphasized dominion in relation to the natural world. Dominion is actually a posture of colonialization. It emphasizes possession, control, extraction, and enrichment for the privileged few. And finally, technology. We have become physically and functionally separate from the natural world. In his seminal 1967 essay, Lynn White argued that our environmental crises are a product of our religion, especially Christian religion, with its emphasis on dominion and exploitation. This essay was hugely influential. In it, he wrote, "Science and technology are so tinctured with orthodox Christian arrogance toward nature that no solution for our ecological crisis can be expected from them alone. Since the roots of our trouble are so largely religious, the remedy must also be essentially religious. We must rethink and feel our nature and our destiny." Now, a lot of people don't realize White was a Christian, and his recommendation was not to reject Christianity, but to improve it after the model of St. Francis. The Christian church, in a way, answered the call. It responded to these environmental crises, and we've seen the emergence of eco-theology over the last 50 years. This is just a small sampling of many, many books that have been written on that topic. The various eco-theologies that have developed share a number of major precepts in common, such as the earth and all of its inhabitants are sacred. Humans are fully enmeshed within the fabric of life. They emphasize interrelationships and reciprocity. Humans, in the image of God, are called to work for the flourishing of the whole earth, and stewardship really is an insufficient and inadequate framework. The restorative work of Christ extends to the entire cosmos. And finally, love and care for people cannot be separated from love and care for the earth. Now, these eco-theologies have provided an important framework for how Christians should interact with the earth. But I'm sorry to say their impact has been minimal. They've not provided the remedy that Lynn White called for. Why is that? Well, a couple of reasons. One is we've reduced our perception of creation care to a short list of duties and prohibitions, what I call environmental legalism. And to be honest, this is why I wish recycling didn't exist. It gives people an easy way out. It happens to me all the time. The topic of creation care comes up, and people are quick to tell me, we recycle. Folks, I hate to break it to you, but we're not going to recycle our way out of the climate crisis or the biodiversity crisis. It's not going to happen. And second, there's a fundamental disconnect between our beliefs and our practice, between our orthodoxy and our orthopraxy. What we know, for some reason, is not being translated into how we live. And I believe we're missing a critical step. That is creation connection. Think of it this way. Suppose that you know that it's important for you to spend time practicing scripture reading, meditation, and prayer, but there was no intimacy, no connection on the other end. Just how long would you continue those practices? If it was like me, probably not very long. For over 99% of our history, probably 99.8% of human history, we've lived closely connected to the natural world. That connection shaped us physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially. But over the last 100 years, that connection has largely been lost. Today, the average American spends 93% of their life indoors. Kids, on average, spend less than 10 minutes per day in unstructured outdoor play, but 7 hours per day in front of screens. Here's a little self-test I like to give. The next time you walk through a shopping area, consider how many brands can you identify by their logos? And then ask, how many trees can you identify by their leaves? We've distanced ourselves from the earth beneath our feet. As both individuals and as society, we've been disconnected from nature for so long that we hardly even recognize it. We live unaware of those health consequences, but they're real, and increasingly we're learning they're substantial. Disconnection negatively affects our physical, mental, and emotional health. For example, it increases cardiovascular and respiratory disease, long-term illness, obesity, attention deficit, and antisocial behavior, anxiety, and depression. Here's a very interesting statistic. Research shows that nature connection is a better indicator of individual human well-being than our financial status and marital status. Nature disconnection is also negatively affects our spiritual health. Psalm 19 is David's rhapsodic declaration that God speaks to us through nature and through his word. And Augustine was the first to formalize this two books perspective 1,600 years ago. That is, that God reveals himself through two complementary books, the book of Scripture and the book of nature, or as Biologos and others like to say, the book of the Word and the book of the world. Henry Nouwen wrote, God's first language is nature. Nature discloses itself to those with eyes to see and ears to hear what the great Spirit of God is saying to us. By and large, though, Christians have given up reading the book of nature. We've chosen to become illiterate in one of the primary ways that God speaks to us. Why is it that Christians put so much emphasis on knowing, meditating on, and understanding the book of the Word, and virtually no emphasis on the book of the world? It's optional. It's a throwaway. Why do we do that? And finally, nature disconnection affects our environment. Environmental problems are not fundamentally problems of the environment. They are problems of the human condition. As Robert Pyle wrote a number of years ago, one of the greatest causes of the ecological crisis is the state of personal alienation from nature in which many people live. And more recently, Miles Richardson, in this really excellent book, Reconnection, writes, there is now global recognition that solving planetary emergencies requires a new relationship and reconnection with the natural world. Well, then, we can ask, what is creation connection? It's the physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual embodiment of our interconnected place in nature. It's enchantment. Now, I'm not suggesting a return to medieval beliefs in a world that's governed by sorcery and magic and fairies, but I am arguing for a more fully Christian perspective of enchantment, that the earth and all of its beings are sacred. It's infused, sustained, and empowered by the Spirit of God. It's not some transcendent state. It's simply being fully human, who we were created to be. Creation connection is a necessary antecedent to sustainable creation care. Why? Because we care for the things we love, and we love those things to which we are intimately connected. Now, if we accept that creation connection is necessary for creation care, the next question is, what develops creation connection? And what doesn't? Well, there's some surprises in the research. One of the surprises is that information and knowledge has a very minimal impact on creation connection. In other words, we can sit and watch the wonderful videos about nature or look at nice pictures all day long, and it doesn't really do much to connect us with nature. What about physical experience? Surprisingly, that also has only at best a moderate effect in terms of connecting us with nature. We would think it would have a lot. Why? Well, oftentimes, our time spent in nature is simply used as a backdrop for recreation. I'm walking, or I'm cycling, or I'm fishing, or I'm doing something else, but I'm not really connecting with nature. Think of it this way. We can't tell the quality of a person's diet by the number of trips and amount of time they spend at a grocery store. So then what works? Immersive experience. Thoughtful, intentional, mindful, and especially emotional connection to the created world around us. Now, Miles Richardson, in this really great book, it's kind of academic-ish, but it's really good. In his book, he identified 5 major immersive pathways toward creation connection. So let's go on a field trip together and look at each one of these in sequence. First is senses, engagement with the natural world through sensory perception. Several years ago, some friends joined my wife and I on a fall hike in a Wisconsin state park, shown here. It was a brilliant, bright blue sky, sunny day. The forest was ablaze in yellows and reds and oranges against a backdrop of these majestic white pines. We were 10 minutes into the walk, and one of my walking partners turned to me and said, "Rick, are we going to see anything on this hike?" I said, "What?" And that friend said, "Are we going to see anything on this hike?" And I was so dumbfounded, I said, "I don't even know how to respond to that question." My friend was suffering from sensory blindness, atrophy from lack of use. Last summer, while on vacation, I convinced my grandkids to explore a nearby grassy field. Of course, they all had to get nets, like a fishing net and cheap kids' butterfly nets. And it took some convincing. They weren't too excited at first. The grass was too scratchy, there might be snakes, and the proverbial, "This is boring." But I knew that if I could get them, their senses, to open their eyes, that we'd have a great time. Because I was on the hunt for that, which you probably can't see, but I knew if we could find that, we could likely find these. Anybody know what these are? Monarch eggs, which would then allow us to find these. And we did. And within moments, the kids' attitude was transformed. They loved it. They were running from plant to plant, looking for caterpillars and legs. They were so excited. We collected a dozen of them. They brought them home, they reared them up, and then they released the adult butterflies. It was a formational experience in nature connection that started when they learned to engage their senses. A second immersive pathway is creation connection via beholding nature's beauty. Not just seeing it, but actively appreciating it. The great thing about beauty is that it occurs across all spatial scales, from butterflies to galaxies. The arts are very important in this respect because visual arts, music, poetry tap into our appreciation for beauty and help us to connect with nature. A third pathway is creation connection by tapping into our emotions, engagement through emotional experience. Powerful emotions such as wonder, joy, peace. Intentionally and mindfully holding those emotions can deepen our connection with nature. And I'm going to cycle back to emotions in a few minutes. A fourth pathway to creation connection is compassion, engagement through caring and nourishing. Removing trash from your local park, or invasive species from your neighborhood. Improve wildlife habitat by providing nesting sites or bird feeders. A few years ago, we had to remove a large tree from our front yard, so we decided to transform just a tiny plot into a wildflower and pollinator garden, which we did over the course of several years, and now it's the envy of the neighborhood. And it really helped us both, my wife and I, to attach to that little plot of ground and to the natural world around us. The last pathway to creation connection that I'll mention is meaning. Nature brings meaning to our lives by providing a sense of connectedness, of belonging, a sense of place. It promotes self-reflection. Take this simple example of tree leaves. Leaves are nature's solar panels. They're specially designed to absorb radiation that is issuing from a thermonuclear explosion 93 million miles away. And by this amazing process of photosynthesis to convert that radiant energy into high-energy molecules. And it's those molecules that, with very rare exception, power every movement, every thought, every breath of every creature on Earth. And in addition to energy, they produce oxygen. These happen to be aspen leaves, one of my favorite trees. Aspen trees provide thousands of molecules of oxygen to our lungs with every breath, right here, right now. Every breath from starlight. Meaning can also derive from our sense of place in a larger environment. Several years ago, I visited Sweden. Here I am next to my Swedish namesake, a linden tree. Lindroth, or properly Lindroth, is linden tree root. And though I'd never been to this part of Sweden before, I felt a deep sense of belonging, a deep sense of connection to people. I came home and told Nancy I found the land of my phenotype. Tall, lanky, old guys still with some hair. And it really felt like I had found my place. It was mysterious. It was awe-inspiring. A valuable question for us all to consider then is, how might we intentionally map meaning across the gardens and landscapes of our lives? Now that concludes our brief tour of the major immersive pathways by which we connect with creation. Of course, they don't operate in isolation. Charmaine introduced the concept to us yesterday of interactions. And as an ecologist, I'm all about interactions. You'll notice that I didn't draw individual lines from the 5 immersive pathways to creation connection, but a common line. And when these emotions and senses of beauty and compassion, when they combine, the creation connection can be that much stronger. They amplify one another via these interactive pathways. Let me give a couple of examples. One is from the literature. That's a brook trout. That's a Colorado Rocky Mountain stream. Once there were brook trout in the streams in the mountains. You could see them standing in the amber current, where the white edges of their fins wimpled softly in the flow. They smelled of moss in your hand, polished and muscular and torsional. On their backs were vermiculite patterns that were maps of the world in its becoming, maps and mazes. In the deep glens where they lived, all things were older than man, and they hummed of mystery. What do we see when we read something like that? I don't know. My first response is, wow. And then, who writes like that? Well, Cormac McCarthy did. But this coupling here, we see our senses, we see beauty, we see emotion, we see meaning, all coupled together, and our response is, wow. Camille Dungy's book, Soil, is another example of multiple immersive pathways. And I don't want to steal her thunder, but she might have not have thought about it in these forms. She'll be talking to you in a few minutes. Her book is a beautiful chronicle of deepening connection with nature in the process of transforming her yard into a garden. And it describes all 5 of those immersive pathways. And that connection to creation, provided a template for the weaving together of history, of race, of motherhood, of spirituality, and profession to find deeper meaning in life. Now, I want to circle back around and talk in more detail about the role of emotion in bonding with creation. And I hope you appreciate the profound irony here. I'm male, I'm Scandinavian, I'm a scientist, I'm a Myers-Briggs INTJ, I'm an Enneagram 5, and I'm about to talk to you about emotion. The good news is, if I can do it, you can do it too. Emotion is especially important in eliciting action. As the poet and wildlife biologist Drew Lanham says, passion is the fulcrum on which our lives are levers. Until we feel, there is no movement towards some effective action or solution. Let's focus on one emotion in particular, and that is awe and its companion, wonder. The definitions of these words are imprecise, but for our purposes, awe is the feeling of being in the presence of something vast and mysterious that transcends our understanding of the world, of being lifted out of ourselves. Wonder follows from awe. It's the state of openness, of questioning, of curiosity, and of embracing mystery. Enchantment is simply wonder magnified by meaning. David writes about awe and wonder in Psalm 27. He says, "One thing have I asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple." To behold is awe, to inquire is wonder. In recent years, awe has become the subject of focused psychological and sociological research. And that work has shown that awe improves our physical, mental, spiritual, and social health. Much of this work has been done by Dacher Keltner and his research group, now at UC Berkeley. And what they have found is that awe leads to improved physiology, a diminished sense of self, imagine that, improved social relationality and integration, in other words, reduced polarization, an improved sense of meaning and purpose. And each of these leads to improved mental health, our mental well-being, less stress, less anxiety, less depression, and improved physical health, improved cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, and immune health, reduced pain, increased longevity. So awe is a very powerfully influential emotion. Well, what elicits awe? Dacher and his group have identified 8 pathways. Nature, okay, we've already seen that. Spirituality, we've experienced that today with our worship band. Moral beauty, seeing moral acts of kindness and courage. Epiphanies, especially for those of us who are scientists, we can recognize that in epiphanies. And a sudden understanding is awe-inspiring. Collective movement, things like dance, even walking together, cycling together, paddling together. Music, and close encounters with birth and death. The connection between nature and experiences of awe and wonder are nearly universal. It's not true only of Christians. If you consider the stance of believers and non-believers alike towards what is known about our world and what is unknown, one feature stands out. The vast majority confess feelings of awe and wonder. We see then that creation connection both is enhanced by and enhances awe and wonder and spirituality. Awe is especially transformative when experienced through multiples of these pathways, just as we saw with emotions. These are a couple of my best friends. For 25 years, we've taken annual canoe trips to the Canadian wilderness. We've paddled thousands of miles, slept outside for half a year, doctored each other's wounds, literally carried each other's burdens, and laughed ourselves silly with stupid jokes. We've entrusted to each other our spiritual, emotional, and physical health. This is going to be difficult, so let me just read from my paddling journal. On the last night of our trip, 2 years ago, we set up our camp chairs on a cliff overlooking a glacier-carved lake. Our shoulders were barking at us, reminding us of a long day spent paddling in unison. We sat in silence, listening to the haunting cries of loons on far-off lakes and the hooting of owls in the nearby forest. We sat entranced as the northern lights danced across the sky, perfectly mirrored in the surface of the lake below. And it doesn't look as good on your screen, but that's an actual photo of this experience. We sat and marveled as the celestial light show was riven by streaks of shooting stars. And we sat with unbounded sadness, profound mystery, and sure knowledge that one of us would not live to make this trip again. That night was transformational. It transformed me forever, and it was catalyzed by awe. So, deep breath. Let's retrace our path. I focused on awe as one of many different emotions as a pathway to creation connection. We could have chosen a dozen others. And emotion is just one of 5 major types of immersive experience. In addition to immersive experience, we have physical experience and knowledge that can contribute to nature connection. In other words, there are many, many, many different paths to creation connection and to creation care. We just looked at one pathway. So, some key learnings. There are many and diverse pathways to creation connection. Find what works for you. These pathways range from simple to complex. There's a common misperception that connecting to nature requires grand adventures, wilderness, and a lot of time, that it's accessible only to the privileged. And this is so not true. Nature is not something separate from us. It's something that we live within, that actually lives within us. As Catherine May writes in her book, Enchantment, enchantment is not only sparked by grand things, the awe-inspiring, the numinous is all around us all the time. And that's the subtitle of Dacher Keltner's recent book, Awe, the new science of everyday wonder. It's around us all the time. But access to these pathways requires intentionality. It's not going to just happen. Virtues don't just happen. They have to be cultivated. As Rabbi Abraham Heschel writes, our goal should be to live life in radical amazement. Get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life casually. To be spiritual is to be amazed. And as Mary Oliver, the poet, wrote, my work is loving the world, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. How then should we live? A few suggestions. Start simple and develop over time. Ask yourself, what's my next step? Find activities that you enjoy. Wonder walks, gardening, birding, cooking, art. A lot of what we already do has a connection to the natural world. We just need to find it and think about it. Practice daily liturgies of beholding creation. These actually will rewire our minds. So step outside, look at the sunshine, look at the eclipse, look at leaves, mindfully, intentionally, thoughtfully, emotionally hold that for 30 seconds a day, and it will rewire your brain paths to better connect with the natural world around us. Keep a nature journal. I started an awe diary. Learn the names and habits of your wild neighbors. Engage with a like-minded community. Model your creation care commitments, and work towards local, institutional, and societal changes that promote creation care and creation connection. Will creation connection solve our environmental grand challenges? Of course not. It's not going to. But what I'm arguing today is that it's an essential and critical step toward doing so. Creation connection is necessary if we are to fully worship God as creator of the cosmos, live as created beings enmeshed within the community of the created, and if we are to love the sacred, extraordinary earth and those who will inherit it from us. So let me close with benediction, a good word. May we seek to better know God through the book of His world. May we embrace this world as sacred, enchanted, and saturated with divine mystery. May we engage in immersive, transformative practices to grow our connection with creation. And may our care for creation flow from a wellspring of connection that is animated by love, sustained by hope, modeled for the world, and regenerative for all the earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. There's such a beautiful connection between what you just shared about and our next speaker. Camille Dungy was born and raised in Colorado and California, and she spent time on all but one continent and several countries. She is an award-winning writer, poet, professor, and speaker, and you may know her as the host of Immaterial, a podcast from the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Magnificent Noise. In much of her writing, she considers history, landscape, culture, family, and desire. Her latest book, Soil, which you already heard a little bit about, the story of a Black mother's garden, is published by Simon & Schuster and is coming out May 2nd, but I hear you have it? Oh, she has it here, and she'll sign it for you later. Camille is also the author of 4 collections of poetry, most recently Trophic Cascade, 2017, winner of the Colorado Book Award, and a guidebook to relative strangers' journeys into race, motherhood, and history, also 2017, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award in Criticism. Camille's interest in the intersections between literature, environmental action, history, and culture led her to edit Black Nature, 4 Centuries of African American Nature Poetry, the first anthology to bring African American environmental poetry to national attention. She also co-edited the From the Fish House Poetry Anthology and has served in several other editorial positions. Currently, she is the poetry editor for Orion Magazine. Her work has appeared in over 40 anthologies, plus dozens of print and online venues in the US and abroad. A university distinguished professor at Colorado State University, Camille Dungy's further honors include the 2021 Academy of American Poets Fellowship, a 2019 Guggenheim Fellowship, an American Book Award, 2 NAACP Image Award nominations, and fellowships from the NEA in both prose and poetry. The National Endowment for the Arts wrote this about Camille. In a genre long dominated by white voices, Dungy explores these entangled connections between humans and nature from her position as a Black woman in the United States. She does so with precise detail, rhythmic lyricism, and a broad inclusiveness. Please join me in welcoming Camille.
Well, good morning. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Let's try that again. Well, good morning. I feel the echo a little better. I am really grateful to be here and want to repeat this thanks for the careful work organizing our event today and Rick, thank you for that wonderful talk, which felt the careful work of organizing today, because the connection between so much of what you spoke about and what I want to share with you all today is quite fluid. So that's wonderful. I'm going to start with a poem, Language. Silence is one part of speech. The war cry of wind down a mountain pass, another. A stranger's voice echoing through lonely valleys. A lover's voice rising so close, it's your own tongue. These are keys to cipher. The way the high hawk's key unlocks the throat of the sky, and the coyote's yip knocks it shut. The way the aspen's bells measure the breeze, while the rapid's drum defines resistance. Sage speaks with one voice, pinyon another. Rock, wind her hand and water her brush, spells and then scatters her demands. Some notes tear and pebble our paths. Some notes gather. The bank we map our lives around. That was the first poem of my first book of poems. After I rearranged the book to speak in a way that I began to understand might be more what people might be used to. The first arrangement of my first book of poems had 4 communities to which I was deeply connected in a kind of order. So the first section was all about one set of my grandparents, and then the next section was about major Black and female figures in the mid-20th century of America who had, I thought, revolutionary and fascinating ways of creating modes of survival. And the next section was my other side of grandparents. And the final section was my greater than human family. And that book went out into the world, and it was a finalist in contest after contest after contest, and it just never quite passed the finalist threshold. And one day I was on a walk through this park that I always wandered through, partially because I really enjoyed the trees and the sort of sounds of a kind of peace that I attained when I walked through this park, but also because it was deeply fascinating on a historic, human historic level. It had, among other things, the packet boat that took Stonewall Jackson's body to its final resting place. Just sitting there in the park. It had a little placard. It was always confusing to me why this boat was there, and I would walk by the packet boat's rusted out hull and this beautiful oak tree, and which was deeply rooted in a history that might have been there when Stonewall Jackson was still alive, and wonder about this deep interconnection between this greater than human world and this human history. And in one of those walks one day, I thought, you know, I might be somewhat alone in thinking this way, that this deep interconnection between what my relationship with the greater than human world and all of those other historical and human stories are inseparable. And it's possible that this book is only a finalist every time because people have wandered through these human histories and then they hit the trees And they couldn't figure out why there was a whole section just about trees, and it didn't feel like maybe other people don't think of trees as family like I do. So all I did was take those poems that were in that section and weave them through the book, as opposed to having them in isolation, which was, in fact, like in retrospect, in addition to the fact that other people might not think of trees as family, was another way of not separating these family members, this community members in their own isolated unit, but creating an integrated, interconnected way of thinking. Next place I sent that book out, it was taken. Like, it was immediate. And in fact, a place that had already said, not quite, right? Really, it was a quick shift. So that was the first time I sort of went out thinking about the fact that how I thought about and talked about the greater than human world and my connection to that on a personal level, a spiritual level, a connected level, was maybe a space of communion and communication and outreach that I could consider. Then in the same year the book was published, I went to a big writers' conference, and I read that same poem I just started with. And after the event, somebody came up to me and said, I never really thought about Black people writing about the natural world. Do you think you can come up with more who do this? Which felt interesting. As provocative and interesting as an invitation. I ended up working with this person as the acquisitions editor for an anthology that we heard about called Black Nature. And in order to convince University of Georgia Press, who published Black Nature, that in fact this book was something that we might want to move ahead with, I had to do a literature review. So you read a lot of books that are already out there in the world and prove that your book is in line but different enough, right, of what things are going on to make it a viable economic choice for the presses. And in the process of doing this at Stanford University, Emory University, the Berkeley Library, the Poets House in New York City, and one other really major library. So I had access to a significant amount of literature. I found 6 poems by 5 Black poets in the environmental canon from 1930 to 2006 when I was doing this research. 6 poems by 5 Black poets. And so at that point, I began to think really, like, why is it that this man had a sort of logical reason to come up to me and say he never thought about Black people writing about nature in this kind of way? Because in my personal, just on my computer, poems I like, and I'm retyping because I want to be a better poet and figure out how a good poem feels in my hands, right? I had 45 Black poets writing in ways that really engage with environmental concerns. And I realized that a lot of it had to do with a stance about what it was that Black writers wrote about. So that even when those Black writers were writing in ways that were environmentally engaged and thoughtful, they weren't included in the canon because of a set of expectations about who does what. We heard with Faith in the beginning that same kind of separation very frequently happens between people of faith and people of science, right? That you can't be one and the other, and so those conversations get separated, or let me just use that more provocative term, segregated in our imagination, that you have to live in one space or another space, and that you don't know or hear stories about this interconnection. So speaking of stories, I'm now gonna read to you some from Soil, my most recent book, which was really a process of thinking through why all these parts of my imagination and my understanding had so frequently been compartmentalized and separated and segregated in both my own imagination of myself often, but definitely in how people were perceiving me and understanding how I might move through the world. My family and I moved from California to Colorado in 2013. We bought a house that was lovely. I really adore my house, but there were things about it that felt not what I wanted to live in, and certainly not what I wanted to raise my daughter in. And one of them was the fact that we had this incredibly monochromatic yard. It was just turf, river rocks, and some juniper and cedar trees, and that was it. And I had, by the way, I had come from California where things are blooming and alive all the time, and I was that first winter in that house was brutal because it was just gray forever. And it was not okay. So we immediately started working on this recovery project. And the more we worked on it, the more certainty I had in that I wanted it to be native as much as possible. I wanted it to be sustainable. I wanted it to be a pollinator patch. And we eventually came up with something that we called the Prairie Project, which was a big patch of turf that we pulled up and replanted with native plantings. In the fall of 2019, before we started the Prairie Project, our neighbor Pam brought me hollyhock seeds she collected on a walk. Dark, round, and bumpy, like dry chickpeas, the seeds need light to germinate. I planted them only 1/4 inch deep. They get really big, and they come back year after year, Pam warned. Be careful to put them only where you want them. I planted one along our backyard's east fence, around a cluster of early blooming bearded iris, and one in the reclaimed bed near the northeast corner. Both those hollyhocks stay short, no more than 3 feet tall. They produce modest flowers, striking up close, breathtaking, really. The deep purple of claret in a glass, but from far away, almost invisible. The third seed went into a patch I began to call the dooryard once the hollyhock bloomed. First to emerge were low, wide leaves the size of salad plates. Then the stalks grew taller than me, to nearly 6 feet. Each stalk boasted bright green, acorn-sized buds all along thick sage green stems. Eventually, several palm-broad, creamy yellow, and girls' ribbon pink flowers opened up and down each towering stalk. Like full skirts, the petals flared around bright yellow stamens and pistils, the straw-like bits that constitute the flower's reproductive parts. The flower's centers darkened, bull's eyes for bees. So sensual, these hollyhocks, and showy. My God. One of those stalks tended to wander, reaching like a tendril from Jack's giant beanstalk toward our front door. If you rang our bell on a windy day, that hollyhock might smack you in the face. I have to train it, say the garden books. Tie the stalk to keep it in place. Unruly plants betray an unpracticed gardener. I don't want you hurt, you who visit my garden. I want to offer a welcoming space. I'd come to the end of my time that I could dedicate to writing one afternoon when this paragraph tumbled from my fingers. None of these are accidents. the omission of Black and brown stories from literature taught in schools set up to serve white people, the condescension my professor conveyed when they considered a Black woman's writing, the absence of stories in canonical environmental prose of women actively engaged in the work of mothering, the prioritization of narratives of solitary men in the wilderness. These conventions are part of a design. I wanted to stay at the desk, to dig more deeply into what the words meant, but I had to collect my daughter from school. This was in February 2020, before the disruptions of remote schooling and business closures and rampant wildfires and smoke and the dead and the dying that changed the ways and the truths and the timelines that we taught children. So often, I put an idea aside and pick it up months later, rearranging the order of telling to more accurately reflect the warped arc of time as I live it. That afternoon, in early 2020, I washed the dishes and prepped dinner while my daughter focused on her homework. Then I ferried her to the dance studio, and while she danced, I scooted over to the gym to work out before driving us home, serving the family dinner. Like, where is this moment for awe? Right? Where is the moment in that kind of schedule to sort of stop and watch the trees? If I had gotten back to that moment of awe, it might not be until after the long morning ritual the next day, or after I moved into what my actual job was going to be. But the genre-shaping writer John Muir, these list of things I was doing weren't a concern. Muir, bless his trailblazing heart, rejected the agrarian life of his father and also some of the religious ideology of that father, and married a concert-level pianist who refrained from playing the piano when he was at home so as not to disturb his writing, and kept a Chinese cook who made sure that Muir had food when he chose not to wander and live on stale bread for days while he tromped through the mountains taking notes for his books. The social and financial position afforded by Muir's writing and his marriage meant he could speak directly to the ears and pocketbooks of the captains of industry whose clout and cash make things happen in America. Even on a 1903-04 world tour, during which Muir encountered stands of mints and poppies, hollyhocks, and etc. in glowing profusion, while walking in the only mountains that he saw since he left America, John Muir could get lost in nature and then find himself again, as self-possessed as ever. Then he could wander home to his California estate overlooking a magnificent garden and orchard. But by the time I got back to the page that I started in February, I had had to load and unload the washer and dryer and breaks from video conferences and check on my daughter's progress in her remote school assignments. And at dinner, when my daughter panicked about forgetting a book report, I had to stay up until 11 p.m. to make sure that the book report was finished, and then wake up early to make sure that the book report was finished. And then, meanwhile, there was a box of tulips and daffodil bulbs that sat on my garden table with a sheet of instructions urging me to get them in the ground immediately. Oval orbs with roots dangling from the bottom like tiny yellow onions. If given enough time to acclimate to the new beds before the long winter months prompted their dormancy, these bulbs would grow green stalks and sprout flowers by spring. In the early hours of the bright fall morning, I could sleep or write or garden or clean the house or help my daughter or stop and sit in a kind of worshipful awe. But I couldn't do all of that or even most of those things. So I tried instead to describe the hollyhock that finally offered the blooms that I'd hoped for at that point in the summer. Upheaval is a word rooted in the soil. It suggests the act of turning up the earth to make room for sowing. After upheaval, new life is revealed. Earthworms, millipedes. The sow-bug's name isn't so much about the pig-like look of the insect as it is about the fact that the upturning of earth that comes with sowing and planting tends to bring sow-bugs to light. A family of blue jays lives in the yard behind our house, and they wing through our airspace most days, flashing their brilliant feathers. In the pandemic-shaded September of 2020, there were also many hundred thousands of acres of wildfire burning very close to my house. On one of the smokiest days, when the skies look like the day after, you guys remember that movie? It was like this after-school special in the 80s, like, welcome home from school, kids. Now let's talk about nuclear annihilation. So I feel like having that, I was like a little bit practiced for the skies of those incredible wildfire, darkened apocalyptic skies, and yet you never really are. In one of those days, the blue jays flashed across our yard, looking quite plain. I had to point the birds out to my daughter, who didn't recognize them. Untrue to the name by which we've come to know them, the birds we saw looked only white and gray. The jay's feathers carry no blue pigment. Our eyes trick us into seeing that shade when light reflects off the birds. On that red-orange day, when the light was so altered, we had to train ourselves to see the birds anew. Maybe this is what it means for me, for this Black woman, this mother, the subdivision dweller with a little yard she tends, to say that I write about the wide, wild world. Maybe it's just a matter of figuring out what can be seen in this light. The word echo derives from the Greek oikos, meaning house. In the context of the word ecology, we understand that house to mean the space of non-human living entities and their environments. In turn, environment suggests a natural world that is larger and separate from the human. The environment is outside the door. In 19th and 20th century environmental literature, the environment is often synonymous with the wild, a state of nature not tamed or domesticated, according to the dictionary that I keep on my desk, an uncultivated or uninhabited region. But I want to make what is inside my door be a part of this conversation, and I don't want to separate my life from the others on the living planet. Ecological thought, conservationist thought, the thoughts of the gardener, these should foster a nourishing and collaborative relationship with other life forms, including those that we've long called wild. This planet is home to us all. All who live in this house are family. What a folly to separate the urgent life will of the hollyhock outside my door with the other lives, the family that I hold dear. My life demands a radically domestic ecological thought. When my daughter was 4, I walked into the bathroom to find her running water from the faucet, just standing there, watching good water disappear down the drain. You'll be sorry you wasted all that water when the water wars come, I told her. Living through perpetual drought in Southern California has made me a sort of a bummer of a mother, I'm gonna admit. But my daughter turned off the tap when I said that, and then she just stared into the mirror with this crazy face that I had never seen. And so I asked her, "What is that face?" And she said, "This is my water wars face." Desert as a synonym for wilderness suggests a God's forsaken place with no hope or help for water. In stories, most people will do most anything not to wander the desert unaided. And the West's water scarcity and arguments over who has the right to water and who doesn't have been among the fundamental constructs of my life. When I was still a baby, living not far from where my daughter practiced her water wars face, Eudora Welty published a review of the book Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard. And Welty began that review with a quote from Dillard's book. Dillard says, "I am no scientist, but a poet and a walker with a background in theology and a penchant for quirky facts." Welty was forgiving but not wholly convinced by Dillard's meandering mind and method. Her assessment of the book was rather icy. She seemed to think that Dillard's writing was ambitious but somewhat naive. But for her part, Dillard says that her book wrestles with God's possible manifestations, an ambition and pursuit that is one that is probably as unlikely to yield permanent clarity as the Colorado River is likely to slake all of our thirsts, but one that feels deeply important to me. Dillard preferred not to think of Pilgrim at Tinker Creek as a meditation on nature. Rather, she considered it a theological treatise. And so perhaps we have in her book an example of the call to see God in all creation. And I appreciate that. I have looked for connections all of my life. Part of my drive to think so deeply about the greater than human world in direct relationship with my personal and cultural history comes from a desire to construct meaning and form and connection with what is beyond me and also what binds me to the rest of the world. It's a spiritual question and a practical one. Harriet Tubman relied on signs and signals communicated by owls and snakes and moss and river currents. Such connections helped her to safely conduct herself and others through a dangerous landscape, one made more dangerous by humans, made far more dangerous by humans than by nature's wild predations. Dr. George Washington Carver put words to this kind of radical connection, one on which Tubman relied. Carver said, "I'd love to think of nature as an unlimited broadcasting station through which God speaks to us every hour, if only we will tune in." My own grandfather studied at Tuskegee Normal Institution at the same time when Carver was there, and I always wondered about the possibility of that, a connection like that being passed on to me to understand how to create a connection with the world within a potentially hostile environment, but also a deeply connected one. Carver spent every day in his garden or walking the woods near his house on the campus. Acts of creation are ordinarily reserved for gods and poets, but humbler folks may circumvent this restriction if they know how. That's Aldo Leopold. To plant a pine, for example, one need be neither god nor poet. One need only own a shovel. I've never restored a white pine forest as Leopold did, but like him, I spent a large portion of my life trying to think like the landscape. I want to access Earth's splendor while benefiting the flora and fauna around, not below me. In the environmental canon, there are plenty of other examples of such reaching toward God, or whatever name can be given to the vast and powerful energy force binding creation. Books in which the faces of God are the faces of bears and muskrats and white pine and fire and wind and water. God's love is manifest in the landscape as in a face, wrote John Muir. Seeking the many manifestations of God, I plant a restorative love in my garden. And I'm going to close with one more poem. When I think, like, why am I doing this Prairie Project? What are the ways that I can see that manifestation of connection and care? This poem came to me as like one of the answers for why. Let grow more winter fat, wine cup, western wild rose. So little prairie left, little waves of blue stem, little fuzzy-tongued penstemon, quieter the golden current, nodding onion quieter now as well. Only a few clusters of Colorado butterfly plant still yawn into the night. Where there once was prairie, a few remaining fireflies abstract themselves over roads and concrete paths. Prairie wants to stretch full out again and sigh. Purple prairie clover, prairie zinnia, prairie dropseed nodding into solidago, bee balm brushing rabbit brush, prairie once, prairie once, prairie once. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Camille. We have about 10 to 15 minutes for table discussion. We'll stop you in a time and we'll do Q&A, and we'll be looking at your questions that you put in WOVA. So enjoy.
No, I think all set. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to bring you back for some Q&A with our guests. Wrap up that last sentence if you could. Okay. If you, on the WOBA app, you can add a question, and we've got questions here from some of our online folks as well. So one of the things I wanted to ask, Rick spoke about his journal when he was camping, and Camille is a wonderful writer. And I wanted to talk about the value of writing as we think about or engage with nature. I am not a writer at all, and I'm a creative writer. I'm a scientific writer. What value can that bring to somebody as they're trying to engage with or connect with nature?
Go ahead.
I mean, this is my actual profession, teaching creative writing and often environmental literature. And so, you ready for the semester? We'll buckle up. But one of my short answers for this question has to do with retention. That the process of writing helps many people clarify and retain information, and then pass it along, so that by writing, it takes a singular observation and an individual's observation and makes it a collectively accessible font of knowledge, information, perception, and sometimes persuasion. And so we can point actually a direct through line to things like the Wilderness Act of 1964 to literature. This poet was writing in a way that informed this next writer, who informed this next writer, who informed Wallace Stegner, who informed a young student who enjoyed Wallace Stegner's writing and was an aide for one of the senators who was trying to promote the Wilderness Act, and said, hey, Wallace Stegner, you were a really persuasive writer. Will you please write something that senator then cites as part of his reason for supporting the Wilderness Act. So all of those writers' individual thoughts became something that was not just collective in this book that we're all reading, but like truly changed legislation, changed culture. We can do the same with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Rachel Carson could have been that scientist just doing that work on her own, and it would have been important work. But what that book, Silent Spring, did for changing an entire culture's values, right, was huge. So that is, to me, it's the key is taking an individual, making it collective so that change is possible.
Great. I just add a couple of things. For me, nothing clarifies thinking like writing. Forces me to be clear about what I'm thinking. But in addition to clarifying thinking, it broadens and deepens my thinking. So in some ways I write to discover me. It doesn't always happen, but it's nice when it does.
Thank you. I'll start with Rick. Stewardship is an insufficient framework. You said that.
Yeah.
Could you expand on that a little bit more? What's wrong with stewardship?
It's so environmental stewardship is something that's in the lexicon. I use the term. I'm trying to learn not to, because stewardship is insufficient in many ways in terms of our relationship to the natural world. I don't steward my children. I don't steward my wife. I steward my money. I steward my tools. Stewardship connotes many things that I think are inappropriate with respect to our relationship with nature. Stewardship connotes that the true owner is off on vacation somewhere, having a good time, and he's entrusted you to care for this stuff. That's not how we see God operational in the world around us. Stewardship connotes that you're separate. You're somehow separate from the stuff. You manage it, you curate it, you care for it, but it's not in you and you are not in it. I think, and stewardship has a strong meaning of management. I think a better metaphor is kinship, of interrelationship, of being part of the community of the created. So I'm trying to steer away from this concept of stewardship. And because in Christian circles, when we talk about stewardship, what do we mean? Money, right? So, yeah, I think it's insufficient. Now, the problem then comes with what is an adequate replacement. There's a whole book written on this topic. It came out of Calvin University. They couldn't decide on an adequate replacement. Nobody's come up with an adequate replacement. Creation care, that's what I tend to use. Even that is not good for a number of reasons. Somebody yesterday mentioned Jonathan Haidt's work, and care is a word that resonates very strongly with liberals but not with conservatives. So creation care, So I don't know, I'm struggling to come up with a term. People come up with phrases or sentences, but I want a term. And I haven't found it yet, and nobody else that I know of has. So I'll stick with creation care for now.
Okay. I'm going to take a question from the audience. Is creation connection actually necessary to care for creation? And this person shares that they're not outdoorsy, their husband has pain when walking, you go out in nature, you get bug bites, you get a sunburn, we got to worry about skin cancer. I don't like camping. If it's about me, I have to use the restroom too often. We care deeply about climate change. Got solar panels, recycle, care about energy conservation. Do we really have to connect with nature?
I think if you're saying that you care deeply about climate change, you do already care about nature. I think given all the completely viable lists of complaints that question lists, the issue isn't about not being concerned about the greater than human world. The issue is not being engaged with a particular representation of what being connected with the environment means. So that like, if you're into the environment, you have to be a gardener or a hiker or and like move into space in some kind of really specific set of ways that limit, and I would argue have actually purposefully been created to limit our connections with the world, that allows then capitalist systems and other kinds of systems of purposeful disconnection to occur with less resistance. But if I only understand that my ability to connect with the greater than human world would happen if I were a hiker. And therefore, in the moment when we were all stuck at home, and even for a while the national parks were closed, like you couldn't go anywhere, then that would have meant that I would have been completely cut off. What ended up happening in 2020 was I had more time to move into my little backyard space and started really thinking, like, why is it that doesn't feel like, is supposed to not feel like the wilderness? Like, what if I really create a backyard that is more native, except that it's wild. There is a kind of wildness and wonder there. To take this even further, I felt like the only way that I could connect with the greater than world and care for it and about it, it would have to be something I could personally walk into. Then I'm not concerned about what's happening in Micronesia. I'm not concerned about what's happening in Southeast Asia. I'm not concerned about what's happening with the desertification of Central Africa. That I only can be concerned about the nature that I can touch. That feels really limited and problematic. We are an entire connected globe. And so caring for creation should not mean only one particular way of being in and with the world. And then I don't believe that it has to mean that you even have to personally be in the space about which you care. The decisions we make and the care that we take and the institutions that we support should be global and often beyond the ability of our bodies to be in those spaces.
Yeah, that's great. I'll just add a couple of things to what Camille said. So I would ask also, or suggest also, that whoever posed the question does have that connection, right? And maybe ask, perhaps that connection was established when that person was a child, right, long ago. And especially that age 7 to 12 is really important for establishing nature connection. And then, as Camille said, and I hope to illustrate, or I hope had hoped to say at the end of my talk, there are a million pathways to creation connection, and they don't necessarily require you to get out of your house. If anyone is familiar with the work of Norman Wiersbe over here at Duke on food and eating, I mean, you can stay in your kitchen and immerse yourself and get connected to the natural world if you're just focused on where your food comes from and how do you fix it and how do you provide it in a nutritional form to your family. And as you recognize that with every bite of food we eat, something dies. So that's what I mean by finding connection, finding meaning, finding our place in the broader world. And it doesn't require trips to wilderness. Those can be really great and fun, but part of what I was trying to convey today is awe and wonder in our everyday experience, in our everyday connections. Step outside and look at the sky, right?
You answered a couple questions in that one, so thank you. Somebody asked, when I talk with my conservative Christian heritage about learning from nature about God, silence. Or they say, I get God did it and it's awesome. There's nothing more to learn from nature. How do we get past this block? How can we move these people to another deeper level?
Yeah,
silence.
tough one. I have to think about that. Here are a few ideas. Once again, the secular world is leading the way and the Christian world is lagging behind, and maybe someday we'll pick it up as well. The secular world, the social science, the medical science is telling us that this disconnection from nature does have serious health consequences. We are inured of them. We're so accustomed to them that we don't make those connections. But now we're learning, there actually are significant consequences. And so, one option is to say, no, it would benefit our health, our mental, emotional, physical health to make those connections. And then, a lot of it boils back to how do we understand God as creator and how do we understand God as redeemer? And if our understanding of redemption is God came to save my soul so that I can escape a fiery, eternal damnation, that's one thing. But if God's all about restoring, regenerating everything back into a flourishing state of being of which I am a part, then knowing that mind of God, I think, prompts me to learn more about, why is he interested in all this other stuff, and what might I learn from it as well? Those are just a few ideas.
I want to give you a chance, our last question here. Let's talk a little bit more about hope. Is it overly optimistic? Is there value in hope? What hope is there? You could each comment on that.
Hope is not overly optimistic. Hope is necessary, fundamentally necessary theologically, socially, culturally, but is empty without acts and
Yes.
is empty without a willingness and a capacity to engage with resilience. So if your hope is simply like, well, I just hope it gets all better, and then you do no act to move towards better in your own space, and then in whatever ways that you can engage more globally, then hope is useless. It does nothing. It's just rhetorical. But when hope means that you act, you reflect, you understand why this is the hope you have, and you seek to increase your own resilience, your own ability to see heartbreak as well as triumph, your own ability to see this is one of the ways that, for me, engaging with the greater than human world is so exciting, because I see these cycles of return and regeneration and return, and it's a regenerative / resurrection cycle that happens in the world perpetually, moving from something dying into compost, into reconstruction. And so I find a very, a path through the living world towards being able to build my faith in the progress that I'm hoping for, right? So to me, then I get really excited being hopeful because of that direct connection.
Yeah, I don't believe in or trust in hope as Pollyannish optimism that the future is going to be okay, because I really don't think that's the case. I'll give an answer from antiquity and an answer from psychology very quickly. The answer from antiquity, Augustine is attributed with saying, hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are courage and anger. Courage to see things the way they are, and anger to determine that they don't remain as they are. There's that action component. And there is a thing called hope theory in the psychological literature. Hope requires three elements: a vision of a better future, a path toward attaining that vision, and third, self-actualization in order to proceed along that path. So a vision, a path, an opportunity. And if I have those, I have hope for a better future.
Oh, that's wonderful. Let's thank our speakers.